Hey guys, it's Exa and welcome back to my channel. Um, Today we'll be doing some fun crafts using resin. I recently got into it and it's been really fun actually. And there's so many things you can do with such a wide variety of projects and things that come out looking completely different, and you wouldn't believe that all of it is resin. So today I'm going to show you a few different resin techniques that I've used and thought were really fun. So let's jump into our supplies and materials. So obviously the most important thing that we're going to need is our epoxy resin. They come in two-part system, hardener and resin, and then you mix them in a 1-to-1 ratio, and that's what kind of activates it and makes it, harden into a plastic-like resin thing. So the first thing that we're going to need is our molds. I have a variety of molds here, but you can use anything you want. There are tons of different mold options. If you check Amazon or craft stores, lots of stuff. So here I have a couple different coaster molds and a mold to make a cool tray that holds them stacked together. Here's another kind of coaster with like a little bit of a lip on the edge. Here's like a big serving tray, cutting board, placemat thing. I use this one as well. And then here's another fun mold that it holds like wine, 2 wine glasses on either side, and then like the middle part fits on the top of a wine bottle. That's pretty cool too. But there's all sorts of stuff you can use: bowls, jars, household things. Really, the options are endless. So the two main things we're going to use to kind of color the pigment of our resin, because it is clear, are mica powders, which kind of make pearlescent sheen, kind of a solid color, so it's not as translucent. Or you can use the dyes. So these will make it more translucent but give it, some color. So I have a variety of options for both of those. Another thing you can mix in with them is glitter. There are endless options with glitter. There's tons of different shapes of glitter. There's different thicknesses, different colors. Yeah, I really love glitter, and this is a great way to incorporate glitter into a project where it's completely like sealed in and doesn't, scatter a glitter trail throughout your house. And you can also layer in tons of 3D stuff into your resin. So for this project, I have some like dried flowers and leaves that I'm going to use, as well as some shells for another section. But honestly, the options are endless. You can pretty much embed anything you want that is like a solid object into your resin. Like you could also use some of these like little glass chip flake things to kind of make it, shimmery and shiny, or shells. You can mix sand in, you can mix flowers. As long as they're dried, they can't have any water content in them. But really the options are endless here. You could put keepsakes. I've seen people make ones for their babies that have the picture of their first ultrasound and their hospital bracelet embedded in, and the options are seriously endless for what you can do with resin. So for the embedded flower technique, first I mixed my resin, and I'm just going to pour a little bit in each mold to kind of start getting it on that bottom layer and on the crevices. We want to start with a little bit of resin before we add any of our flowers, because we don't want them to be on the surface. We want them to be completely enveloped in resin. So obviously you don't want them on the bottom in some spots that can make little air bubbles and things that don't have resin on them. So once you put a little resin, you can start adding your little bits of flowers and leaves and, whatever you want to. And as you see here, I'm kind of poking them with a toothpick to just help me push them down into the resin and get any bubbles out. And then as you add them, just keep layering it up and adding a little more resin on top, add a few more things. You can kind of swirl them around and make the design how you want, just making sure that all of the leaves and things and your glitter is completely covered in resin from the bottom to the top. So as you see here, now that I'm pretty much done, I'm just going back through using my spoon to carefully dribble a little bit more resin on top of any of the leaves that are starting to kind of stick out of the surface here, and make sure that everything is fully set in the resin. And once we're done, we're going to leave these for a full 24 hours to harden before we take them out of the molds. So once they are hardened, you can go ahead and take them out of your molds here. And as you can see, well, actually, it's kind of hard to see, but the edges are a little bit rough on the very top edge from where I filled the resin. So where those sharp edges are, you can take a razor blade or some sandpaper and just kind of carefully scrape off that little rough edge bit from where it sort of made a convex edge sticking to the silicone. So that's just what I'm doing here, is just kind of gently pulling off that little bit of extra, and then you can sand it nice and smooth to have your finished coaster. So for the beach themed ones, the first thing I did was kind of put some shells in the corner using the method we just went over, just kind of putting some resin, sticking them down, and covering them on the top with resin. So next we're going to add our sand to be our, beach. So I have just some regular old loose sand, and I'm mixing it with some resin in my cup and kind of just spreading that on top of my shells so it looks like they are going to be in the sand. So these molds, I'm making them upside down. So we want to have our shells at the surface level, and then we want the sand to kind of be the backdrop behind them. And as you can see, the molds are kind of just leaning on another mold, so they're angled so that way, when it levels out, it doesn't fill the whole mold with the sand, because we do want to make half of it the water. So we're going to go ahead and just spread on our sand and then let those dry. Alright, so now to mix our water, I'm taking some blue just pigment dye stuff for resin and mixing it in with some of our resin. And then I'm also going to take some of this white mica powder and just sprinkle it on the edge where the sand meets the water to make the, kind of like where the waves crash and they turn white. So put a little resin on the white parts there, and then use our toothpick and just kind of swirl that around to make it look, like waves, edges crashing a little bit. Don't worry about making this super specific, because once we add the blue, we're going to kind of mix this stuff a little better and make sure that all of that powder gets encapsulated into the resin. So once I have those spread out about where I want them, I'm going to add a little bit of blue on the other side to start making our water. And as you can see, it kind of pushes the powder back towards the middle, again, kind of making the wave thing going. So once we have all of our blue in, then we can go ahead and swirl it a little bit, so that way we can get kind of the blend in there, so that way it looks like, the waves are crashing along the shore. So as you can see, once that has dried, we kind of have our pattern, but we're not fully filling our mold yet. So we're just going to take some regular clear resin and kind of just fill up the back, so that way they're going to be the full thickness of our coasters and nice and organized. Now I am doing this in a bunch of layers because as each layer dries, then I don't have to worry about my new resin mixing in with the other layers and kind of messing up my patterns. So that's why we did shells and sand first, and then we did the water, and now we're just going to use some clear to kind of fill up the depth that we need for our resin. And you could do any color on this top layer. You don't have to just use clear. You could do, more blue, or maybe you wanted to do another color, or just put some powder in there. Whatever you want to do, you can, to just fill up the thickness of these molds. So once those are all cured, you can pull them out of the molds, and ta-da, you have a whole bunch of cute little beach-themed coasters. One thing you can do on the back of these is I just put some of that sticky felt and kind of cut it to shape on there, so that way they're nice and smooth and they're not going to scratch the table or anything. So that's a really good way to like finish the project. So for our layered painted one, I'm going to start using some of my mica powders to kind of make a marbly background for it. So I'm using this really pretty blue here, and then a teal, and then we will use some white to kind of lighten it up and mix them around. So first I'm just taking my resin. I am pre-mixing the two halves, and then to make sure the ratio is correct, and then splitting it into my separate cups to mix apart my different colors here, and making sure that those are really, really well mixed, so that way all of the powder is kind of enveloped and evenly spread throughout our resin. This is going to help make sure that the curing process goes smoothly. If If you don't get it fully mixed, sometimes you can end up with like sticky spots that just never harden, and then, your project's kind of ruined. So make sure that you are getting these really, really well mixed. So then to start, I'm just going to go ahead and spread the colors in my mold here for my background. Now, because we are doing the background layer and we're going to be stacking a lot of layers together, you don't need to make this really thick. It can be kind of just a thin sort of background coat. You don't want to be like fully filling your mold, because then you won't be able to add more layers on top layer. So we do want to make sure that you're not putting too much too much resin in here at one time for each layer until, the very end, and then you can just kind of add as much as you need to kind of fully fill out that mold. So now I'm just going to go ahead and take my little toothpick, or you can use a spoon or a popsicle stick or whatever you have, and just kind of start spreading and mixing these around to get sort of the marbled pattern in here. So I found for mine that the spoon seemed to work the best because it made it the most smooth transition. As you saw a minute ago, using the toothpick, it just sort of made patterns, but I wanted to truly sort of blend them together into more of a marble pattern. And also with the spoon, it's helpful, you can kind of spread it into those corners to make sure that your whole mold is going to be filled with your background. Because we're using a smaller layer, sometimes it tends to kind of puddle if you don't have enough resin in there to fully cover it. So you want to make sure that you're getting it all the way spread around and filled into all of the edges here. So once you are satisfied with your marbly swirly technique, then you can go ahead and let this background layer harden for 24 hours, and then we will get started on the painting. So for the painting part, I'm actually just using regular old acrylic paint that you can buy at any craft store, and a paintbrush, and just doodling, my design on here. I'm going with like an underwater coral sea theme, using my color palette, but yeah, whatever you want. So this is going to be our first layer. So this is more of the background most layer, and you can do as many layers as you want and have available thickness within your mold. So for mine, I think I'm just going to do 2 or 3 layers. So we're starting here kind of with the background plants and corals and just painting those on. And you do want to make sure that you are letting your paint fully dry before you go ahead and put resin on it, because if the paint isn't fully dry, then it can cause issues with the resin curing, make weird bubbles and stuff like that. So make sure that any of your paint is fully dried before you put your next layer of resin on. So once that layer has dried and you're satisfied with it, you can go ahead and mix some more resin and make another layer. Again, like the first one, we're kind of going with thin layers here because we need to add a few of them within the molds to kind of get the layered effect to go on and look like things are in the background versus the foreground. So just make sure that you're not doing too thick of a layer here, and keep in mind, how many total layers you want for your finished thing. And that's it. So on my next layer, now that I have my background on, I'm just going to put some fun little fish, so it looks like they're kind of swimming in front of the plants here. So we're just going to make our cute little school of fish. Yeah, again, no matter what you're doing, just think about what you want in the background versus the foreground, and then kind of make that as you are layering along. And then when you look at your projects from different angles, you'll be able to sort of see that some stuff is more raised above the others. So once my fish dried, I did go ahead and put another layer of resin. I didn't film that because it's the same as before. Just another thin layer, let that harden, and then you can go ahead and do your foreground, or however many layers you feel like doing. So for mine, just on our foreground, we're going to add some little more foreground stuff that's going to be in the front. So I have some like purple rocky things going on and some more little squiggly, corally, seaweedy, whatever stuff on here. And that is it for this project. So once we sealed in that final layer, you can go ahead and take them out of your mold, and now you have a finished project. So for me, these are going to be like little coaster placemat tray things. But yeah, you can do this with any kind of mold that you want. So another method is we can take this thin plastic and use some Sharpies to put our designs on it, and then they'll just look like clear decals within the resin. So once we've kind of drawn our designs on our clear mylar plastic stuff, we can go ahead and mix our background resin, or if you want this totally clear, that's fine too. I'm just using a mix of glitter in here and some pink shades and a little bit of gold to make my background here. So again, just make sure that you are getting it really, really well mixed in there together, and then you can go ahead and pour it into your molds. So for this one, we are not going to be doing the separate layers where you let them harden and then do the next layer. We're going to be doing it all in one, so that way our resin is all wet and mixable all at once. So we're going to put our background color in here first, get that about halfway up the distance of the mold, so that way we can hide our decals and kind of make them look like they're in the middle of it. So once you have that poured in, then you can go ahead and take your cutout little plastic pieces with your designs on them and gently press those onto our background color. You don't want to push it too far in because you want them to kind of sit on top of the glitter here, but make sure that you are, kind of adjusting and pressing well enough that you're not getting any air bubbles underneath them. That's sort of the tricky part here, is you want to make sure that you are pressing firmly enough that you can pop the air bubbles out of the sides of your designs here. And then once you have those positioned without any air bubbles in them and they're, in centered or whatever position you want them, then we're just going to go ahead and fill the rest of our mold with our clear resin, or if you want more glitter, whatever you feel like. But for me, I'm just going to put some more clear resin on top here. So once they are all dry, you can go ahead and pop them out of your molds. And now it looks like you just have this black line work design embedded in the middle of your resin project here, because the clear plastic gets hidden by the resin and blends in and just disappears. So this is a really quick and easy technique if you have like little decal designs, or you want to trace something off of a computer onto your plastic to kind of get those embedded into a resin project. So guys, I hope you liked these tutorials and ideas. If you try your own resin projects, I would love to see what fun stuff you guys come up with. So send them to me on Instagram. It'd be really cool to see what you guys do. And as always, please like and subscribe. I will have some more fun resin projects coming up. Specifically, I have an idea to make a pair of like clear heel like wedges out of resin, so we'll see how that turns out. But until next time, I hope your day and your crafts are as beautiful as you are.